And for that, from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry.
We all have embarrassing stories from our 20s, but Nick Leeson can probably top them all, because this is the man who, at the age of 28, bought down one of the oldest banks in Britain. Barings was a bank so influential, it was once known as Europe's 6th greatest superpower. This was the bank that financed the Louisiana Purchase, the bank that floated Guinness, the Queen's personal bank. And after 200 years of surviving monarchs and revolutions, Nick Leeson, a rogue trader from Watford, would finally bring it down. But how could one man possibly collapse a 232-year-old institution? Well, it's quite a story.
Barings is facing bankruptcy.
But I don't necessarily have to like you.
The worst earthquake to hit Japan since the 1940s. 1,000 more people are missing.
Nick Leeson grew up in a council estate in Watford. His father worked as a plasterer, his mother was a nurse and carer. Despite his humble beginnings, Nick always had big ambitions. And after Margaret Thatcher's deregulation of the financial markets, the best way a guy from his background could make serious money was in the dizzying, lucrative world of financial trading. In 1987, he secured a job at Morgan Stanley, supporting the traders on the front line. But despite 2 years of working there, Nick was unable to get promoted. Undeterred, he moved on to Barings.
Barings had a wonderful franchise, particularly in Britain, but it was certainly smug, it was certainly arrogant. It had always been at the heart of the establishment. It had always been regarded really very special.
Leeson, on the other hand, was not that impressed.
Would be happy to say that I'd never heard of Barings.
But it was a famous old bank.
So, there's no Barings in Watford.
Nick made waves in the bank's settlements department, ironically investigating allegations of fraud. His supervisors were impressed, and when Barings opened a futures trading operation in Singapore, they decided Nick was the man to run it. He was 25 at the time. The trading floor of SIMEX, Singapore's international monetary exchange, was a den of chaos. Phones ringing off the hook, traders yelling from all sides, there was even the odd fist fight. And in this intense environment, on behalf of the bank and its clients, it was Nick's job to buy and sell futures of the NIKKEI 225. This is an index of 225 of the largest companies on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Nick was trading in futures contracts of the NIKKEI. A futures contract is like placing a bet on where you think the index is going to be 3, 6, 9, or 12 months from now. If you guess correctly, you make a profit. If you guess wrong, you lose. Now, if you're looking at this trading floor and wondering how anything gets done in this chaos, then pay attention to the hands. At the time, traders communicated their desire to buy and sell through hand gestures. If you're buying, you have your palms in, like you're grabbing something towards you. If you're selling, then you're pushing something away. And the fingers, well, these tell the exact amount you're bidding. But in the rapid ups and downs of the market, mistakes inevitably get made. And according to Leeson, that's how things started to unravel. On July 17, 1992, Kim Wong, a new Chinese trader in Leeson's team, executed a wrong trade. Instead of buying 20 contracts, she sold them, and Nick only realized the error later that evening. It was a loss of almost $40,000. Now, Leeson should have immediately reported the losses to head office in London, but he held off, thinking he might be able to trade it out. But in just 3 days, the losses grew to $120,000, and it was now too late for confessions. After getting so close to his dream of being a high-flying, successful trader, Nick couldn't risk being sent back to settlements in a stuffy, boring office. Instead, Nick disguised the losses in a computerized error account, the existence of which he hid from London. He named the account the 5/8 account, 8 being the Chinese symbol for good luck. But luck wasn't on Nick's side. Months later, another trader messed up, and this time the losses totaled up to $300,000. Nick chucked this loss into the 5/8 account as well. For now, it would be out of sight and out of mind. Except for one problem: margin payments. Margin payments are deposits the exchange requires you to make at the end of every day to prove that you have enough funds to cover your losses. The bank makes the payment and later gets the money back from its clients. The margin payments required to keep the 5/8 account open was now quite a lot. Nick realized that he had no choice but to ask London for money.
Alright, it's Nick here, from Singapore. I'm gonna need 750 grand. I bought some future contracts for a client. I'm gonna need it right away as well. Okay, alright, well thank you very much.
And just like that, without any questions, they bought it. And with that obstacle overcome, Nick realized he could hold onto his losses and hopefully trade out of it in his own time. But every day the market didn't move in his favor meant more losses and more margin payments. But Nick, being his crazy confident self, believed it was only a matter of holding out. Except by December 1992, Nick Leeson was concealing losses of $3 million. Nick's idea was essentially the same strategy you'd see adopted by novice gamblers in casinos worldwide. He was doubling down. Say you're at a roulette table with $10 on red and the ball falls on black. Instead of cutting your losses, you try to make the money back by doubling your bet. And with each loss, your conviction that the ball will land on red only grows. After all, the odds should eventually work in your favor. However, in Nick's case, this strategy meant that by 1993, his hidden losses would grow to $35 million. Over at Barings though, Nick was a trading superstar. The way they saw it, he'd brought in $15 million of profit, which was 10% of Barings' profit for an entire year. And obviously, they didn't know it was all just a lie. When you factored in the losses in the 5/8 account, Nick was making no profits at all. Despite his worrisome strategy, in July 1993, the market did actually turn in his favor. Nick was able to wipe out almost all his losses. And if he just walked away right there and then, Barings might have survived. But walking away would mean Nick losing his reputation as a hotshot trader. Nick began to give his clients cut price deals, selling futures at unreal prices. He again hid any losses that he made in the 5/8 account, planning to trade his way back out, just like he did before. You have to wonder, how could Nick possibly be getting away with so much deception?
Fundamentally, this same plan is followed by all business organizations.
One reason was that, against all common sense accounting practices, Leeson was put in charge of the trading office and the back office for futures in Singapore. It was a case of the wolf guarding the henhouse. And it became far too easy for him to fudge the balance sheets in a way that hid his losses. Leeson had also learned during his time in settlements that the bank's collection systems were a mess. Even though London had been sending enormous amounts of money to meet their clients' margin payments, no one seemed to have noticed that the clients had not been paying it back. If they had only followed up, they would have realized these so-called clients didn't exist at all. To make matters worse, derivatives trading was fairly new at the time and not many people knew how it worked, including some of the people who were supposed to be supervising Leeson.
Why didn't those people who ran Barings come to you and say, what are you doing?
Because they're stupid. They don't understand the business and they should never have been in the position that they were in. Especially people like Tony Hawes. He was supposed to be controlling the global treasury function. He was supposed to understand derivatives. He didn't. And he would pay the money every single day and would accept, pretty ridiculous explanations from me.
By July 94, London decided it was finally time to take a closer look at Nick's inexplicable surge of profits. I mean, it's about bloody time. So Barings sent a team of auditors to check on it. This time, Nick thought his game was truly up.
You have to expect everything to be found. They're supposed to, the nature of an audit is that they're supposed to test information and test documents. Now, if you picked up any document, it had the 5/8 account on it. In some way or form, any document had the 5/8 account on it. So of course I'm worried.
But miraculously, he got away with it.
They come in and they don't test any records. So I can't be happier. They didn't test one record. One report. It's not an audit.
I mean, they didn't test any records. The auditors did leave concerned about Nick's dual role in Singapore, but ultimately, they didn't want to make any changes that would hinder what was, to their eyes, an extremely profitable business. To keep up his illusion of outrageous profits, Nick's tactics got wilder and wilder. He began buying his own contracts at extraordinary prices using the 5/8 account, and it worked. In 1994, SIMEX honored Barings with 2 awards for outstanding performance in the exchange. Everyone knew Nick was the man behind the success. In December, Barings flew all its traders to a conference in New York where Nick was singled out as a shining example to aspire to. But in reality, by that point, Nick was concealing losses of $324 million. And every day, London was sending hundreds of thousands of pounds in margin payments to finance Nick's trades. In January of 1995, SIMEX's own auditors were on Leeson's trail. To keep them off his scent, Nick would literally forge documents, cutting signatures off old letters and sticking them to fake ones. Just imagine what he'd do if he had Photoshop. One of the faxes even said from Nick and Lisa. Desperate to clear out his losses, on January 16th, Nick places a short straddle, betting that the NIKKEI would stay stable. But this is the moment Nick's luck finally runs out.
More than 1,800 bodies have been found.
The very next day, a disastrous earthquake hits Kobe in Japan. Millions lose their homes and the Japanese market crashes. Instead of cutting his losses, Nick gets desperate and buys huge amounts of contracts, hoping he could induce the market to rise. This is basically like trying to make the wind change direction by farting. And of course, it wouldn't work. Nick's losses kept mounting. On one day alone, he lost £50 million. In the end, it was a Barings employee sent from London that finally noticed the discrepancies in Leeson's accounting. On the 23rd of February 1995, realizing that he could no longer deflect the clerk's polite questions, Nick excused himself, saying his wife was unwell and they'd be back in 45 minutes. Instead, he rushed home, packed up his belongings, and in a final attempt to escape the tangled web he'd weaved for himself, Nick and his wife Lisa fled to Malaysia. It didn't take long for Barings management to piece together what actually happened. When final figures were released, it turned out Leeson had exposed the bank to a loss of $1.4 billion, more than Barings' trading capital. Even with this dire news, no one actually believed that the bank would collapse. After all, this was Barings you're talking about.
Well, things like that didn't happen. I mean, it just didn't happen.
It was a Friday, and since the markets were closed over the weekend, they had 2 days to fix the situation.
Good evening. Crisis talks have been going on all day at the Bank of England to work out a deal to save Britain's oldest merchant bank.
They needed a massive capital injection to cover the losses. The Sultan of Brunei, Barings' largest client, had shown interest in buying part of the bank. But there was one problem. To approve such a large transaction, the Sultan's advisors needed his final approval. By the time the paperwork was in order, it was already 2 a.m. in Brunei. The Sultan was asleep, and nobody dare wake the Sultan. And just like that, the oldest merchant bank in Britain, a bank that withstood wars and revolutions and kings and queens, went bankrupt. Nick Leeson was eventually caught in Frankfurt. They extradited him to Singapore, where he was sentenced to 6 years in jail. Due to a cancer diagnosis which he eventually recovered from, he was released in 4. At the time of his arrest, rumors were flying that Nick would profit from selling his story. He always labeled them as ridiculous, but there's no doubt that's what happened. Though his actions were unscrupulous and downright fraudulent, the public consensus was that it wasn't half as irresponsible as Barings' own lack of oversight.
Well, basically, I don't think the management have done it anywhere near enough to stop what the guy did out there.
To think that the management have allowed this to go on, because the guy in the papers is getting a blame for this Leeson, but who are his superiors? They must know.
Nick was hailed as a working class hero. Ewan McGregor played him in the movie about his life. His story inspired a pop song, an unperformed London opera, and even a lager with his face on it. Today, Nick is the darling of the UK dinner circuit, once receiving $100,000 in speaking fees for a single night. He even appeared on Celebrity Apprentice and Celebrity Big Brother in Ireland. In 2005, Nick wrote a second book about stress management, something we can all agree he knows a thing or two about.